We now return to the continuing adventures of Theoryman.
Help! Help! Someone stole my purse! Again.
Never fear, Theoryman is here.
Not you again. Last time I had my purse stolen, you just told me about superheroes crawling into each other's butts.
This time I can definitely help though.
Really?
Yes! Your purse was stolen, you say. Well, did you know that wasn't really your purse?
What?
It was actually a clone created by the Jackal when he went on a secret business trip to Europe with your arch enemy.
How does that make any sense?
Makes sense if you read the comics.
Screw the purse. I'm just getting a wallet.
And thus the day was once again saved by Theoryman. Internet, welcome to Game Theory, the channel that uses Miles Morales but converts all our measurements to meters Morales. The newest generation of consoles is finally upon us, and with great console generations comes great launch title responsibility. And while things have been pretty darn quiet in Xbox's corner, for PlayStation fans, Sony delivered a solid follow-up to 2018 Spider-Man with the new Spider-Man Miles Morales. Peter Parker better start looking over his shoulder. Between this game and Into the Spider-Verse, Miles is quickly becoming the de facto Spider-Man. And now with all the past Spider-Man being confirmed for the third Marvel movie, Tom Holland, you precious little human jelly bean, I know you're busy playing in the jungles as Nathan Drake, but if you're not careful, you're gonna get squeezed out of your little red spider tights, friendo. Anyway, the Miles Morales adventure, while excellent, did feel like a brief stopover. Something to fill the PS5's launch lineup. An appetizer for the bigger course that's headed down the line sooner than we think. Spider-Man 2. And we all know it's coming, as MNIAC Games said in a blog post responding to questions about Miles Morales, quote, "Many of you fans have wondered if Peter Parker is okay. Don't worry, we still have much of Peter's story left to tell." Now, we don't know when this game will be released. Heck, the game hasn't even been announced yet. But I need to do this theory now since I expect once it is finally announced, the big surprise is gonna be spoiled, and if I want to have a shot at being the person who called what the twist is, I need to start talking about it now. I think I know who the big twist villain of the game's gonna be, and it's not who you all think. Oh, to be sure, Insomniac's been very clearly hinting at a particular villain to star in the sequel. We're gonna get into that in a minute. Spoiler alert for the original Spider-Man and Miles Morales, by the way. But here's the thing, they've also been setting up for another villain. One that would be an even bigger reveal, only this time, the clues have been hidden in much more subtle ways. Ways that I haven't seen anyone talking about. And so I put the pieces together for what I believe to be the big twist reveal of the second Spider-Man game. One more spoiler warning before I say it. Ready? All right. Well, the two games you've played so far seem to be setting up Harry Osborn to be Venom in Spider-Man 2, and they've been alluding to the return of the Green Goblin. I believe the real big bad of the next Spider-Man outing will be pretty much the biggest baddie of all Earth 616, Dr. Doom. Yeah, that guy who's the villain from Fantastic Four. Let's start by turning our clocks back to 2018 to recap the plot of the original Spider-Man game. Oh, and while we're here, I gotta go eat in a crowded buffet restaurant and go to a packed theater to watch Into the Spider-Verse. Oh, if only I knew what was coming 2 short years later. Spider-Man told us the story of an already veteran Peter Parker taking down Martin Lee, a supervillain named Mr. Negative who was created when an Oscorp genetic experiment went wrong. In the game, Lee wants to weaponize the experimental GR27 serum, codenamed Devil's Breath, and release it onto the city of New York. To defend against his attacks, Mayor Norman Osborn hires a mercenary organization named Sable, which turns out to be little better than the goons they're meant to defend against. Between Sable and Mr. Negative's gang, the streets of Manhattan turn into a war zone. Eventually, Martin Lee partners up with the real big bad of the game, Dr. Octopus, Peter's scientific mentor. Together, Ock and Lee assemble 4 other mega-villains to create the game universe's version of the Sinister Six: Doc Ock, Mr. Negative, Vulture, Rhino, Electro, and Scorpion. They take the idea of weaponizing Devil's Breath and run with it, successfully infecting large swaths of the population before Spidey saves the day. The new game, DLC, spin-off, DLC-quel, title, Miles Morales, follows a fairly similar setup. Two villains, one with connections to our hero, go to war with each other, producing warring factions, duking it out in the streets, forcing Spider-Man to deal with the fallout. With Peter Parker out of town, our new Spider-Man must once again face down a corrupt corporate suit and a former friend, with Mr. Negative and Doc Ock being swapped out with the CEO of Roxxon Corp and the Tinkerer, who is eventually revealed to be Miles' childhood friend of Finn Mason. Okay, so across both games, we have ourselves a subplot that never gets resolved. Norman Osborn's son Harry is suffering from a rare genetic disease and is suspended in a vat of mysterious green liquid, trapped by black oily webs. Not a big surprise that this heavily implies that he's gonna show up in the next game as Venom. It's also how they choose to end the new Miles Morales story, with Norman demanding that his son come out of the treatment tube. Again, outright telling us that Harry is now free and is gonna be one of the next game's big baddies. And Harry becoming Venom isn't that far-fetched. In the Ultimate Spider-Man animated series, Harry acts as Venom for a long time before he's eventually freed from its corruption. But notice that I say one of the big bads. As we just saw in the game recaps, each of these games have had at least two main focal villains. Also consider this, the Sinister Six is a really strong opening move. It's usually the kind of thing they have to build up to, and there's a reason for that. Spider-Man doesn't usually go toe-to-toe with the big cosmic villains like Galactus, just doesn't match his character or his power sets. As such, there's not a whole lot you can do to ramp up the intensity after the Sinister Six makes an appearance. Heck, even Miles Morales doesn't try to one-up the first game, instead focusing on a slightly smaller threat in a slightly smaller game.
How's day one of solo Spider-Manning?
Pretty good. I stumbled on a conspiracy in my neighborhood.
Classic.
But Spider-Man 2 for the PS5 cannot afford to be a slightly smaller game. So how do you top 6 villains in your follow-up title, especially now that you have 2 Spider-Men to throw at them? Quality and quantity. You use 3 heavy hitters: Venom, Green Goblin, and the surprise appearance of Dr. Doom. Here's the thing, Harry as Venom has been very clearly set up, and he would serve as our villain personally connected to Spider-Man, filling out the slot of Octavius and Finn Mason from the first 2 titles. Plus, there have already been a ton of Green Goblin Easter eggs sprinkled throughout the first game. Obviously, there's the prototype mask that Mary Jane puts on, which itself references the Goblin's iconic glider and pumpkin bombs in the corner of the HUD, and the physical recreation of the bombs in the lab. But there's also a subtle reference in Harry's medical file. Looking at Harry Osborn's medical document, you'll find references to Amazing Spider-Man Comics issues 31 and 136, the first appearance of Harry Osborn, and the first time Harry dons the Green Goblin identity. Anyway, if Harry wasn't already covered in black webs, it'd be my guess that he's gonna be the new Goblin, but with so many hints leading up to what promises to be an Osborn-centric story, the appearance of the Goblin seems all but guaranteed. So then why do I keep harping on about this appearance of Dr. Doom in the new game? Well, unlike Venom and Goblin, which are pretty heavily predicted at this point, the reveal of Dr. Doom would be a huge surprise, a huge press getter for the game, because up to this point there has been no indication that he's anywhere close to being on the table. But you see, that's where you're wrong. He's been telegraphed in plain sight throughout both of these first 2 Spider-Man games. Our first clue comes in Miles Morales. To keep the story focused on Miles, Peter needed to not be around. I mean, if he were around, he would probably be the main character, so the writer sent Peter off on a little working vacation with Mary Jane off to a place called Symkaria.
I read MJ's front pager about Symkaria.
We're told Symkaria is in the throes of a brutal civil war, which is why Mary Jane is over there to shed light in the story. Symkaria was also an important player in the first Spider-Man game and its DLC, as it's the home country of Silver Sable and the Sable Mercenary Group.
I must return to Symkaria.
Right, you have a war to fight.
Even Harry Osborn was supposed to be in Symkaria on vacation, but that was just a cover for him floating around in a giant test tube.
Symkaria. Weren't they just in the news?
The long and short of it is that this place is important. It's been mentioned loads of times throughout both games, it's in the middle of a war, and it just so happens to border a country called Latveria. Latveria is the home country of Victor Von Doom, aka Dr. Doom, who rules over the country as Supreme Lord. In fact, the only times Symkaria really matters in the Marvel universe is when Dr. Doom is up to no good. So, you wanna know who's probably behind that war that Mary Jane's investigating? Doom. He's never been a big fan of his neighbors and in the comics has attempted to invade Symkaria on multiple occasions. In fact, a recent development in his own line of comics has him actually taking control of the country. Sure, it might be framed in the game as a civil war, but Doom is most likely the one pulling the strings in the background. In fact, I think the whole third game might be riffing on a plot from the Spectacular Spider-Man. In it, the Green Goblin has an army dubbed the Goblin Army, And wouldn't you know it, but the Goblin Army story comes to a climax in Symkaria. Osborn attempts to turn the entire population of the country into goblins using an aerosolized version of the Goblin Serum. Wow, it sounds incredibly familiar. Just like with Devil's Breath in the first game, it's Osborn developing a genetic serum that goes awry and then is spread in the air to infect the populace. Except where Devil's Breath would just kill its victims, the Goblin Serum turns its victims into homicidal superhumans. That's exactly the kind of third act escalation that would be perfect for an open world Spider-Man game. After you've gotten really good at beating up street thugs and super soldiers, the game ramps up the difficulty by making all of them Goblin soldiers fighting for Symkaria. I mean, we're told Devil's Breath was created in an attempt to cure Harry's rare genetic disease, and by the end of Miles Morales, Norman is still desperately pushing forward with a cure. It's not hard to assume that Oscorp continued research and eventually came up with the Goblin Serum. Now, I know Spider-Man traditionally takes place in New York, but a new map would go a huge way to making the next game feel like a true sequel, and also avoid some of the criticism that Miles Morales has endured. The problem is that there aren't many places on Earth that are ideal for Spider-Man. New York is famous for its forest of skyscrapers, and there are maybe a handful of other cities where it'd be really fun to swing around. I mean, as much as I'd love for Spidey's next video game to be set in Tokyo and be an adaptation of the 1980s Japanese Spider-Man, it seems unlikely that we'd be suiting up as an emissary from heck.
Spiderman!
So what if the developers had completely free reign to, make up a city? One that's perfect for swinging around. Once again, Symkaria provides. With only a few loosely defined cities, Symkaria offers level designers complete control over what they want. Plus, Peter's already spent an entire game in Symkaria. He's learned some of the language.
And good luck learning some Karian.
Why are there 7 different words for bathroom?
We only got some vague hints as to what Peter was actually up to while he was there, which indicates that there are still more answers to come. There's also a more important reason I think Dr. Doom is going to be such a big part of the new game. So far, the games have had 2 major villains fighting it out in the streets. The first game had Dr. Octopus assembling the Sinister Six, while Norman Osborn hired Silver Sable to take over the city. Miles Morales dealt with Roxxon's army of super troopers going up against Tinkerer's underground. Venom operates alone. He doesn't have an army of thugs, but both Goblin and Doom do. 2 armies fighting in the streets for Spider-Man to sort out. It continues the winning formula Insomniac Games has created in these first 2 installments. Lastly, though, is the long-standing connection between Peter Parker, Venom, and the Fantastic Four, aka Dr. Doom's most common enemy. In the opening shot of the first game, there's a sticky note that reads, "RR suit fabric ballistic, call to confirm." RR most likely is a reference to Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, the leader of the Fantastic Four. So we already know that the games are trying to hint at a connection between Peter and Reed. This is further cemented by the importance of Empire State University in that first game. The game makes no small deal about this being Peter's alma mater, which, like the Symkaria references, is probably laying the groundwork for the next game. Because wouldn't you know it, other famous alumni from that school are Reed Richards and, of course, Victor Von Doom. What's more, it's Reed Richards who originally figures out the secret of the Venom suit in the comics. After bonding with the symbiote in the comics, Parker begins having strange dreams. The suit even starts controlling his body while he's asleep. To figure out what's happening to him, Parker goes to the one person that he trusts, a fellow alumni of Empire State University, Reed Richards. All of this setup of Symkaria, of Empire State U, all of it is just to pave the way. When a new game needs flashbacks to Peter's history with these characters, it's not gonna be coming out of nowhere. It's not gonna feel like some afterthought that was shoehorned in because they needed to figure out new ways to incorporate these characters. No, it's already been established in the game world in the previous installments. It's already been established in the game world that Peter has connections with all of these people and places. So it seems like we have all the pieces in place. A need for a change of scenery and one-upping the bad guy quotient mixed with 2 games worth of hints and a legacy of comic book action. All of it strongly hints that Dr. Doom is gonna be heavily involved in the next game. And I'm gonna go one step further today and try to predict a part of the plot. When Dr. Doom attempts to invade Symkaria, Silver Sable will call on her old friend from the first game, Norman Osborn, and Spider-Man. Osborn says that he can help her, but only if she lets him use Sable mercenaries as guinea pigs for his Goblin army. Spider-Man gets pulled into the mess because, well, he's Spider-Man. Spidey then has to fight off the forces of Dr. Doom to keep Symkaria from being invaded, while fighting the Goblin army to keep Symkaria from being infected. And and Venom is there too. Maybe starting as a hero and turning bad, or just as an evil menace lurking in the shadows, whatever. All this will lead to what Marvel hoped to establish with their failed Avengers game, a Marvel video game universe. While Spider-Man has always taken place in a bigger universe, this would be the first real step into crossover territory, and it would be a massive statement. By introducing Doctor Doom through a Spider-Man game, Marvel can make the Fantastic Four cool again, which, let's face it, they need all the help they can get. And from there, the movies are just a step away. For once, the video games would be the ones paving the way. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Now, I know what you're thinking. Yes, I do have a lot of time on my hands to think about this stuff. Look, if you're anything like me this holiday season, you've got a lot of time on your hands as well. So why not use it to enrich that smooth chicken breast brain you've settled into over quarantine by using today's sponsor? Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audiobooks. They make it fast and easy to listen to everything from audiobooks to podcasts to guided meditations and more. And with thousands of titles to choose from, Audible has what is essentially a boundless wealth of information available for you to cram through your skull at literally any given moment. And if your listening habits are a bit less violent, Audible is there for you too. Recently, in order to gear up for the holiday season, I've actually been revisiting some of the old classics with Ollie. I'm talking How the Grinch Stole Christmas, The Mitten, The Night Before Christmas, Herschel and the Hanukkah Goblins. That's right, if you know it, you know it. And honestly, as much as this is for Ollie, it's just as much for me and Steph too. I mean, there really is nothing like having our favorite childhood stories read aloud to us while we're decorating the tree. Maybe throw a little hot cocoa in there too if you're feeling crazy. It's just a nice way to take in a little extra holiday cheer. And let's face it, this year is especially one where we could all use a bit more of that. Speaking of that holiday cheer, now is the best time to try Audible Plus with their new holiday offer. For only $4.95 a month for the first 6 months, you can get full access to the Plus catalog, filled with thousands of titles across different formats, from audiobooks to popular and exclusive podcasts and more. You can download or stream without limit too. I'm talking offline, anytime, anywhere. It's actually been a really nice thing for me to just sit down and close my eyes and listen to audiobooks without screens or anything. It's been a really nice way to just calm down and reset at the end of this crazy year. So get started today by going to audible.com/matpat. That's audible.com/matpat. Links down in the description, or you can just text MatPat to 500-500. So thanks again to Audible for sponsoring this episode, and as always, folks, remember, it's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching.